Good day. My name is Nadia McConnell. I'm president of the U.S. Ukraine Foundation. Excuse me, I've just lost my voice. Welcome to this very timely discussion. We are honored to have with us 4 members of the Parliamentary Coalition United for Ukraine. I will introduce them now, and then we'll proceed to the discussion. We have Michał Kamiński, Deputy Speaker of the Senate of the Republic of Poland. We have Rihards Kols, who is a member of the European Parliament and former chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee in Latvia. Marko Mihkelson is chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Parliament in Estonia. And then the chair of United for Ukraine, Žygimantas Pavilionis, who's also deputy chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Parliament in Lithuania. Also, Brzezinski, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Europe and NATO policy, and also a member of our Friends of Ukraine network. I first contacted Žygis after I viewed a press conference that a delegation of members of United for Ukraine held at the Ukraine Crisis Media Center on Ukraine's Day of Independence in August. I was very taken by the various topics that were discussed and wanted to broadcast them more throughout the U.S. But of course, recent events demand that we discuss the incursions of Russia into Poland, the Baltics, and other countries. I'm sure that many of you feel like I do, that we are experiencing what I call mental whiplash, trying to keep up on the developments dealing with Putin's war in Ukraine on a daily basis, if not hourly. We have a lot of ground to cover. So first, I want to get an understanding, I think our audience, as to what is happening regarding these excursions into the various countries represented here. Then we will discuss the response, and then also what needs to be done next. How should the West respond and what can we anticipate further from Russia? So let's dive in. For our first round, we'll get a brief discussion of what Putin is doing in your countries. Žygis, I'm going to ask you to start. But before you talk about these incursions, I would like you to take a few minutes to discuss or let us know about United for Ukraine, this parliamentary group that I think brings together some 36 countries, which has been very, very important in terms of advocacy and lobbying on behalf of not only Ukraine's freedom and sovereignty, but everybody's freedom and sovereignty. So Žygis, please.
Thank you, Nadia. This was created by current Defense Commissioner of European Union and my former Prime Minister Andrius Kubilius. And the main reason was more or less wake up Europe to stop appeasing Russians, stop buying their oil and gas. Strategic decisions on EU enlargement, candidate status for Ukraine, accession talks, and also pushing them to more strategic decisions on NATO enlargement. And surprisingly, we more or less accomplished all those tasks in Europe. We are quite united in Europe, but the main task still remains Washington. We gathered in Vilnius in NATO summit in 23, and we were so disappointed with then Democratic administration and also German Chancellor, who blocked Ukrainian invitation to NATO. But the same story continues with new American administration. They're not opening the doors for Ukraine to NATO, though Berlin is already with us. They are not introducing those Russian sanctions announced so many time before. And they are showing all signs of appeasement of Russia, meeting in Alaska, embracing illegitimate President Lukashenko in Belarus, sending him birthday cards and canceling, stopping sanctions to Belarusian airline that will be providing those packages from Boeing to Russian companies. So kind of appeasement that I felt when I served in Washington, D.C. under Obama, when he was making that reset, though it's now called differently. But I remember what happened after reset. Crimea was taken. I think with all those incursions, I think Russians are testing the ground how far they can go. And if this appeasement is continuing from American side, we could expect the worst. Last word, because I'm really ending now, reading the book about Jan's father, Zbig, who was young and he made a doctoral thesis how to destroy the Soviet Union. But Nadia, how long did he fight? Like 4 decades, I counted, until different presidents, Carter and then Reagan, did it finally. So, shall we wait for another 4 decades for Americans to really hear us in the region? And how many nations and territories will be lost until Americans are waking up, especially when Europeans are so much united? So I hope not.
We cannot accept that. Okay, next I want to turn to Michał to tell us about the situation in Poland. I know there's been strong rhetoric regarding what's going on, but it isn't just the most recent incursions. They've been going on for quite some time. So if Michał, if you could just tell us what is the state of affairs regarding Russian incursions.
I would start with the let's say a broader picture. And the Russian and Chinese incursions in Poland are less actually visible today because I'm sorry, the drones, they are very visible, but there are much more effective, less visible ways of intrusion into Poland by China and Russia. And I think that the most effective way they already did, they changed the opinion in Poland towards the war in Ukraine. Maybe not towards the war in Ukraine as such, but towards Ukrainians as our neighbors. And it was obviously work of a Chinese and Russian influence in a media, in a social media. It was visible. We saw it. We observed it from the very beginning. We saw the repeating arguments, the cliches. They were raised by this job, actually well done in the Polish social media. So what we saw in the air, these intrusions by drones, what we saw on the ground, I mean the terrorists sponsored by Belarus and Russia, which are trying to ignite fires in different places in Poland. They are trying to sabotage the railways, and our secret services are catching them. Why they are doing it? That's obviously the most important question. For me, this is a psychological operation which is directed to weakening the belief of the Polish people and in the other nations, their respective other nations, weakening our belief in the Western world. Because this is something which was every time a problem for Russians. We didn't believe them because visibly the West was better than them. Visibly. Everyone who grew up in Poland when I was young knew that West is better than Russians. It was not the question of propaganda, not the question of ideas, not John Paul II, Wałęsa, and even the church, with whole respect to all those people, but we just knew it. That was so obvious that we are living in shit because we are in the communist under the Soviet oppression and the West is living better. It was obvious. Today, the Russians, they are trying to destroy our belief that the best could protect us. Because today, this economical argument is no more, people don't see it today as an alternative. no one, unfortunately, no one in Poland is seeing today that there is an economical alternative. We can live in the West or we can live in East. No one believes that we can change the system. Everyone believes that we will be living in the free market economy, more or less, you know. But if the Russians will do what they want to do, to destroy the beliefs of Poles that America and United Europe, there are two pillars of our security, it will be the field for Russians to destabilize this part of Europe. Because obviously Poland as a Eurosceptical country, it's one of the biggest achievements of Russia, let's be honest. Because if Hungary is Eurosceptical, you can treat it as a small disease. When Poland is becoming Eurosceptical, it's putting the whole region under the big question mark about the stability of the European values here in this region. So today, when the Russians will succeed, it will weaken the Polish, let's say, Polish society, and then that's their goal. I don't think that they are preparing the invasion as such for tomorrow. I'm not telling you that there is no danger of invading by Russia, of invasion by Russia. There is obviously, but I don't think there is a danger in terms of hours or weeks or months even. What is much more I think much more dangerous today is the psychological game with our societies. We are losing the confidence in our values. We are losing confidence in our alliance. We are losing confidence in the Western democracy. When we see guys in the bison, you know, wearing the bison hats in U.S. Congress a couple of years ago, in the place which for all of us, when we grew up in 80s, the American Congress was one of the most sacred places in the world. It was the symbol. We wanted it because it was a symbol of democracy. Now we are seeing that this is no more a sacred place because the guys with the bison hats can run there and saying that he's saving the American democracy, which is quite wild. But so today we are losing this confidence. And that's the most dangerous thing because the Russians will build whatever they want to build politically in our region on our lack of confidence to the Western values. I'm sorry to maybe I was a bit chaotic, but
I think this is perhaps a topic I certainly would like to explore maybe in another webinar. But I have to comment that, you know, I have thought that one of the great successes in Ukraine has been the reconciliation between Ukrainians and Poland.
yeah.
And it goes back to in 1990 when I was there for the Ruch, you know, the democratic movement, Ukraine. Lech Walesa was the first foreign leader to send greetings to the Congress. So let's make sure that cooperation continues. Well, back to the Baltics. Latvia has been quite a bit in the news since, I guess, particularly the first of the year, when in late January, there was an undersea fiber optic that was cut, I guess, between Latvia and Sweden, and it was damaged, prompting Latvia to say that it was likely due to external influence. But later, Swedish authorities said that after investigation that it was probably accidental. Well, Rihards, if this was accidental, I'm sure you can tell us about many incursions that certainly are no accident.
Well, thank you. I think I will start more broadly. Right now, we're kind of examining one case, another case, kind of isolated events. Those are not isolated events. It's a pattern. It's a pattern that is really escalating right now in the last year or so, but it's something that started right after the 2014. We saw Russia really waging their clandestine operations across Europe. We saw the poisoning of the opposition. We saw attacks of international institutions, cyber attacks, and it's only didn't see any reaction, like swift reaction, just, pointing the fingers and so on. It's only emboldened Kremlin's regime to actually test further the red lines. And I would say that just not going into those specific items, I can say that actually Latvia was the first, the Baltic countries that experienced the Middle East war at outdoor front. Last year in November, Shahed drone, fully loaded, crash landed on Latvia's soil. That was already the first incident in our region already. Intentionally or not, again, I don't believe in coincidences when it happens in such a frequency. It is something that is testing our readiness, our response. And I would say that last week, the mouthpiece of Kremlin, spokesperson of Kremlin, Peskov, mentioned that NATO is at a war with Russia. Reverse psychology means Russia is at war with NATO. But by other means. It not necessarily has to be hot war, conventional war. It's clandestine malign activities. We see the GPS signal blocking. It's already for years continues in our region. Now it escalates with the drones. Just now, Denmark, again, the biggest airport has to shut down, and the investigation is coming out, and which is also very interesting. Whenever we mention these cases, be it drone, be it the undersea cables, we say hybrid attacks. We soften down our response because there is no law in Europe or international law that defines what is a hybrid attack. We know what is sabotage, we know what is terrorism, and our rules of engagement are based on these kind of threat assessments. When we politicians, leaders are saying hybrid attack, we tone down. We tone down our response, our swift reaction, where we should be very decisive on what to be done and counter the threat where it's coming from. So this is something, a trend is continuous. Even right now, after violation of the airspace, be it in Poland, be it in Estonia, I'm thankful to the governments of the countries of NATO who have in last 2 days come out and said that future rules of engagement at their national level will be to shoot down. That is something, again, reflecting back at the NATO response, because NATO is transatlantic alliance. It hasn't been separated, thank God, yet, so that it's, US is somewhere else and Europe is somewhere else. So we still need to have US on board when it comes to assessing these threats and having response. Yes, we've been calling right now, let's not rebrand. It's not about rebranding, but it's about the structure from air policing to air defense. Because again, air policing, it's a mild approach. The jet fighters who are being launched because of the air policing, they don't have the hot weapons on. They have guidance and so on. They cannot, even if there's a real threat, to initiate the target destruction. Air defense, yes, it's already totally different story, and it sends a clear signal to whoever wants to undermine our deterrence. And again, we come back to deterrence by denial. That's been somewhat reiterated from one summit to another for the past, let's say, 4 or 5 years. I think it's a time that the posture is deterrence by punishment. Otherwise, we're saying keep on attacking us. We're just going to increase our deterrence. To what point? To what point that we have the casualties on the ground? That is already totally different scenario. Sorry, I'm kind of going out of what you said about the one incident or another, but we have to see it's a pattern. It's a pattern. It's already a war, because that is words used by Russia itself. Of course, they're saying NATO is attacking, but what they're saying, we are attacking you. We are testing you. We're gathering all the intel, all the info, how you respond, how much time it takes to take the jet fighters in the air, what is the rules of engagement, and whatnot. And so far, what we can see, they're successful. Unfortunately, they are succeeding undermining our deterrence, even though we, as much we want to deny that. Otherwise, if we were successful, such clandestine operations wouldn't take place at all. So I will stop here.
Alejandro, I thank you so much, because actually it is important for us to understand that this is, I mean, we could go back months, years, right? It's been, the Kremlin has never stopped in different ways. And you're absolutely right. We are in a war, and it doesn't necessarily always mean that it's tanks and weapons. There are also other elements to it. Last but certainly not least, let's get to Estonia, which has been certainly in the news when, I guess, last Friday, 3 Russian MiG-31 fighter jets violated NATO member Estonian airspace for 12 minutes. So, Marko, could you please share with us the situation, as Rihards said, not necessarily just what happened last Friday, but more broadly?
Yeah, thank you. Has been a very interesting few days for us here in Estonia, but most importantly, how strong has been and how swift and quick has been the response from our friends, allies, and supporters around the world, actually, not only within NATO. As you know, we initiated yesterday Security Council meeting on this topic, and today NATO North Atlantic Council met as well and made have a good statement. Hopefully also the necessary steps now will follow as well, which indicates not only the efficiency what we have here in Estonia or in other Baltic countries, but air defense domain has a few holes, to put mildly, across alliance. So this is urgently need to be addressed, and I hope that this quick reaction in terms of from our side, but also from allied and allied response to that will lead to right decisions in practical terms. Because I fully agree with Rihards and others that what we see right now is a long-lasting Russia's offensive, if not war, against the Western alliance, against NATO. And they initiated, if I may say so, a direct war against not only specific country, but also against our alliance, if not earlier than in 2008. Then they started a war against Georgia and occupied 1/5 of Georgia's territory. The main reason for that was to make sure that NATO will not enlarge into the South Caucasus. And they succeeded, unfortunately, just moving in and occupying 1/5 of territory of Georgia. And now we know, unfortunately, what has happened with Georgia, how effective has been their sort of malign interference into the internal affairs of one very proud nation as Georgia and Georgians are. So and then of course what followed up in 2014, the war which started against Ukraine to destroy Ukraine, was also to make sure that Western alliance will not be able to destroy the dream of Putin of making Russian Empire again great. So obviously this strategy what Putin has for a long time has not changed, and part of it is to destroy our resolve, to destroy our unity, to destroy NATO end of the day, to divide Europeans and Americans, and to make sure that Russia will get upper hand, the veto right over decisions of security on the European continent. This has been long dream of theirs, not only Putin's, but also Stalin fought for that actually in 1930s already. So nothing new. What is missing, unfortunately, today and for a long time is that yes, we keep repeating, we as NATO allies, that we are united. But we understand in many ways the threat which is coming from Russia. But at the same time, and also we are starting to put more money into defense and increase deterrence against Russia. But at the same time, there are too many words and not so many real deeds in a way that Russia will believe that we are serious, that we not only say but also mean if we're saying something that we will do that. And unfortunately, the reason why they don't believe that deterrence works that much as it did during 1960s or 70s or 80s is what is happening right now in Ukraine. That we are not united behind Ukraine. Yes, as Žygis described, this incredible effort of ours, our joint effort to keep European parliamentarians together and reach out to our colleagues in America as well. But we are not united when it comes to the question how we should help Ukraine. What should be end story of this war, and what we should give and do for that. If somebody can tell me what is our unified strategy in terms of helping Ukraine, but most importantly, what is our strategy? Then we deal with Russia. I think that you cannot tell me what is that. Yes, if that is just to ask us, Estonians, Latvians, Lithuanians, or Polish, more or less we can say what should be done. Ukraine should win this war. Russia must be defeated in their aggression, in their imperial wars, and that could somehow help us to deter our threats as well, and possible their incursion or interference into our country. So that is what is still missing. And as we hear our leaders talking and speaking in New York at this moment, you don't hear that, unfortunately. And there is no leadership. There is no leadership in the Western world today, and that is something what makes Russia more aggressive. And specifically, this is my last point right now. I don't know what Ian thinks about that, but I think that this is what happened in Alaska. It reminds me very much what happened in June in Geneva in June 21, when Putin met Biden. What followed, we all know. Now, after Alaska, I don't have obviously details what happened there in the car or what happened during the meeting, but still I think the KGB guy got his kind of message that he can actually escalate and move on, push the limits, test us, and so far he has been successful.
Well, thank you, Michael. Ian, I introduced you earlier, but I would like to also add that you've been, I guess, in this, if you could call it struggle, because you were in Ukraine, I think, in '93 and '4 as a volunteer advisor to the Security Council, if I call. So you've been in this battle for a long, long time. And since several people have brought up Dr. Brzezinski, I think he's the one, I know he's the one that said, Russia without Ukraine, Russia with Ukraine is an empire. I don't know if I recall the other part. Without Ukraine, it's just a gas station, or was that McCain's comment? So Ian, maybe correct me on that. So Ian, unless you want to make a few remarks about Russian incursions over, let's say, the U.S. in Alaska and other places, please begin our discussion about what has been the response to date by the alliance.
Okay. Well, thank you, Nadia. Thank you for convening us, and thank you for all you've done to generate support for Ukraine over this last decade, longer than that, but particularly this last decade and a half with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And let me commend my colleagues on the panel here, Žygimantas, Pavilionis, and the rest, for all they've done to generate parliamentary support for Ukraine. That is unbelievably important, and if we didn't have them leading the parliamentarians the way they are, Ukraine would be in a far worse situation. Let me build on broadly on the points that have been made. Marko noted the infamous Alaska summit, and think of what's followed that Alaska summit: an escalation of the intensity of Russia's land attacks, ground attacks in Ukraine, and barrages. I mean, massive barrages of drones, hypersonic missiles, cruise missiles against Ukrainian civilian targets. And that's just Ukraine. Then, of course, more recently, we've had 19 or so drones fly deep into Poland, configured for specifically that mission. That was an intentional barrage. We had a drone go into Romania, which I have to suspect was intentional. Estonians, as was just pointed out, had 3 Russian MiGs for 12 minutes violate their airspace. It really shows, that alone shows how we need to shift NATO's air policing posture from air policing to air defense. That is, armed aircraft ready to shoot down incurring aircraft. We've had a ballistic missile strike on a U.S. company in Ukraine, a missile or drone strike on the British consulate in Ukraine, the EU office in Ukraine. The list goes on. And what we're experiencing here is a systematic failure of deterrence when it comes to addressing the escalating aggression posed by Russia. And it is rooted in the weakness of the alliance's response all the way back to Russia's 2014 invasion of Ukraine. The alliance's failure to respond forcefully to Russia's month-long buildup, mobilization of forces along Ukraine's frontiers in 2021. And of course, acquiescence to Putin's exercise of nuclear coercion during the course of this phase of the war, which of course is only, that acquiescence is only emboldened and facilitated Putin's actions against Ukraine and against the alliance. So, when we think about what to do, let me throw out 5 kind of basic assumptions we've got to recognize and make. Maybe they're not even assumptions, they're recognitions. First, as was pointed out by Rihards, he put it well. Russia is at war not just against Ukraine, it is at war against NATO. Think about it. Not just the aggression about Ukraine, buildup of forces during this war over the last several years along the Baltic frontiers, along the Finnish and Norwegian frontier, active measures across the alliance involving information operations, cyber attacks, subterfuge includes sabotage and assassination, harassment of military aircraft, and the list goes on. Let me quote Steve Biegun because he put it well. Quite simply, he said, Putin has declared war on the West. The West does not yet understand we are at war with Russia. And in that failure to recognize that reality, the alliance, the United States, our allies, have basically ceded escalation dominance to Russia. And when you do that, you're inviting more aggression. So first, Russia's at war against not just Ukraine, but against NATO. Second, This is a long-term challenge. This is a long-term declaration of war by Russia against the West. It's rooted all the way back in 2007 when Putin gave his infamous speech at the Munich Security Conference in which he railed against the international order, democratically based, rules-based international order, and NATO's expanding membership. And then he activated that with the invasion of Georgia and now the invasion of Ukraine and this escalation of aggression against the West we've seen over the last year and just another uptick in the last several weeks. Third, Russia is going to continue to increase the size and capability of its armed forces. I mean, we are being blind to that. The leaders of our military communities on both sides of the alliance are warning us that Russia is reconstituting just the damage that it's experienced in its war against Ukraine faster than expected, and is continuing to modernize its air and naval and nuclear arsenals. The Russian military just last year in 2024 was already bigger than what it was when it began the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. I add that because that shows the problems becoming more significant. Fourth, we got to recognize that Russia's aggressive actions short of war are going to continue and escalate, and we're living that right now. Fifth, Moscow's exercise of nuclear coercion is going to continue to be a key element of Russia's strategy. We've got to expect it to intensify. We have repeatedly rewarded this coercion by expressing fear of nuclear war, declaring no boots on the ground in Ukraine, limiting the flow of supplies to Ukraine, limiting the types of equipment we're giving Ukraine, how they can use it. When you reward nuclear coercion, you are encouraging its repeated exercise and escalation. So what to do? I'll be quick and brief on this, but now is the time for us to really mobilize the full scope of Western power against Russia. That means leveraging our economic power, our military power, our ideological power. We get into details of that. It's got to be a major muscle movement that really convinces Putin that use the old Soviet phrase, the correlation of forces before him have changed, and at a minimum, put at risk the territorial gains he's made in Ukraine. I'll just close on a positive note. It's easy to say that we can do that, should do that. But the fact of the matter is the West can do that. Our power significantly overmatches that of Russia in military, economic, ideological terms. I mean, think about it. Our GDPs, $55 trillion in NATO alone, is 25 times that of Russia's. Our defense spending in NATO alone is $1.5+ trillion and growing. That's more than 10 times that of Russia. We have the power of being on the right side of history in this. We should be weaponizing the power of truth against Russia. If we do this, it'll at minimum bring Russia to the negotiating table. This is not a matter of capability, of assets, having the mass that's necessary. It is just it's not a matter of capacity. It's a matter of strategic vision and political will, and we need to exercise it.
Thank you, Ian. As always, you really sort of pull it all together. Talking about the response by the alliance, maybe Marko, I'll ask you. Several of you have mentioned that we need to get beyond the words, right? It's actions that count. And NATO's Rutte said to Russia, "We're ready for you." And I guess the alliance, because Estonia has called for Article 4, was meeting, I guess, is meeting on this issue. And Michał, to ask you, Ambassador Waltz vows that the U.S. will defend every inch of NATO territory. How do we square this with what President Trump has been saying of late?
We are observing it, and it became an issue in Poland. It's a very actually heated issue in Poland, what actually Trump said, because Trump's involvement in the Polish election campaign, everything he's now seeing and every act of Trump is actually regarded in Poland mostly by the, let's say, perspective of our internal division. And because Trump supported the winner in the presidential elections, Mr. Nawrocki, who is in a very strong opposition towards the government of Mr. Tusk. So whenever Trump is saying something which is regarded as a weak or as a treason to the Western values, it's immediately raised by the government and by the government spokesman, and they are saying, and they are actually attacking Nawrocki, asking him, let's call to your friend Trump and ask him what he actually means about it. And whenever Trump is saying something, let's say, strong about Russia, the other side is using it. Look, our ally Trump is now saying what we want to hear. The good side is that both are actually united in their opinion about Russia. That's something which I would like to underline. How the Russia is acting in Poland, it's not to making Russia popular. It's making West unpopular. That's exactly what they are doing with Ukraine. They are not saying that you should support Russia during this war. They are just spreading anti-Ukrainian resentments and so on. That's this way. And whatever Trump is doing, it's unfortunately, because, we have this perspective in Poland, which I try to explain you, this internal fight, and in which, unfortunately, Trump is regarded as a figure in this internal dispute, put it mildly. But unfortunately, the fact that not only Trump, but various American presidents are choosing very unfortunate words or are choosing very unfortunate dates. I served as a Secretary of State to the late President Kaczynski at the 17th of September 2008. This is the date and the date of the Russian invasion against Poland in 1939. And this was the date which Obama chose as the date to announce the cancellation of the missile shield program in Poland, 17th of September. So in Polish perspective, what Trump is saying is actually the part of the broader problem, that American presidents don't understand Polish feelings, they don't understand this region, and for them, sometimes it's just a part of the game. For us, it's the question of life and death, not a game, because these dangers are really, really real for Tallinn, for Warsaw, for Vilnius, for all of us here. And we know that's the difference between us and American politicians. Me, Žygis, all respective participants of this discussion will not survive 10 minutes in Russian hands. I'm not over-exaggerating. We will not survive. As a Polish, I saw the lists of my Ukrainian friends. They prepared the list of Ukrainian politicians to execute them just after when they think that they will take over Kiev. So I have no doubts we will be killed by them. Our American counterparts, they don't have this actually problem because they know that's the business. For them, they are just the partners. For us, they are enemies because they want to kill us physically. And it makes us actually, but again, I would like to tell you, it's not my job to criticize Trump, to criticize other American presidents, and to be part of this American discussion. My job is to take lessons. And our lessons is we have to be more unified, but we have to be strong. Because the main problem of West today is Putin is doing what he is doing because we cannot respond. I can tell you, the only persons, the only politicians in this world who actually approved that they found a proper language with Putin are both coming from the Turkish countries. One is Aliyev and the second is Erdogan. I can tell you, NATO country shut down Russian jet fighter 10 years ago, 11 years ago in Turkey. It happened, and no third war happened, or third world war happened. Turkey just shut down the Russian plane because they entered the Turkish airspace. What Aliyev is doing today with Putin, requiring his apologies, and what he's doing with Russians actually on the Azerbaijan territory, this is the language, I'm sorry to say, but this is the language Putin understands. And now Aliyev and Erdogan, they are teaching us how to talk with Putin, because now they are free also to have a conversation with Putin, because they have already record of shutting down their jets.
You, Marko, would you like to make some comments on this issue about actions versus just words?
Yeah, as I said critically, that unfortunately I don't see the leadership who could really stand up and lead. I fully subscribe to what Ian said, all these 5 points and actually what should be done. But I think that perhaps the way forward is that yes, we all are united. We should be united. This is basis for solid deterrence. But there should be action. And what I see is that the countries who are close to Russia, Nordic countries, Baltic countries, Poland, maybe Romania, some others, the UK, Netherlands, GEF countries, I mean, end of the day, coalition of the willing, we have to somehow make a difference. I know what has agreed among military commanders when it comes to the proposed security guarantees for Ukraine. Yes, it's quite remarkable actually what has been put together. But what is missing right now is a political decision about what we're talking here when we say security guarantees. Are we ready to go into real direct military conflict with Russia? Because deterrence for Russians work only if they understand that if they move on or if they start again, if we can predict that there will be any ceasefire or peace between Russia and Ukraine, they obviously they don't give something to the security guarantees like we saw in case of Budapest Memorandum if they feel that we are running away immediately if there is another offensive from Russian side. Article 5 and NATO is something what has kept them at the bay. But what is very disturbing to see more often these days, that there are a lot of people who say that NATO is dead, NATO is gone, NATO is not there, deterrence doesn't work, deterrence is not visible. It's sometimes, obviously, you can argue against it, but I've never seen so many of these kind of opinions. Yes, Russians are working hard as well, disseminating this kind of narratives among people here and there. But what is missing right now is the really show of force. And where we can do that is Ukraine. German Chancellor, Mr. Merz, obviously he's one of those leaders who might stand taller than he is actually. He's tall guy, but he can be taller even. He promised during a campaign that if he will become Chancellor, Tauruses will go to Ukraine. Have we seen that now when he's chancellor? Unfortunately not. And what has happened is that if you look, what worries me really a lot right now is that in the UK, in Germany, in France, but also partly in the United States, internal politics is turned upside down. Who is the leading in Germany? Who is leading in UK? Who is leading in polls in France? And this is the matter of just a few years if that could turn around and make real internal problem for us. So we don't have time. We run against the time right now, and this is where perhaps smaller countries like Baltic nations, Nordic countries must show initiative and move on.
Nadia, if I could add a point.
Yeah.
One thing that happened this year that no one really said anything about was that NATO at its summit was supposed to promulgate its new strategy for dealing with Russia. And unfortunately, the U.S. administration took that off the table because they didn't want to have a negative relationship at the start with Putin. If I could urge, something that needs to be done would be for our parliamentarians, the European Parliament, the national parliaments, the Congress, to demand from their administrations, what is the Russia strategy? And that Russia strategy really, ought to do three or four things. One, first and foremost, defeat Russia and Ukraine, because that's the starting point everywhere. But it should also deter aggression against the alliance member states. It should contain Russian influence and control, beyond its borders, and it should degrade Russia's capabilities and determination. So a strategy, to defeat Russia and Ukraine, deter its aggression, contain its influence and control, and degrade its capabilities and its will and determination. That is missing from our approach to the war over Ukraine and our approach to the broader aggression that Russia is exercising against the alliance and the Western community of democracies.
Before I go on to Zigis and I guess Richard, gentlemen, I think I'm older than all of you, and because my name is Hope, means hope, right? I am still optimistic that it's not going to take Zigis 40 years. As somebody who's been in this since I was conscious, when we first immigrated to the United States, and you'd say, where are you from? Ukraine? Oh, that's Russia. It's the same. I have seen the progression, and we've now, I think now more Americans understand that, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you. And I think what you have done also, I don't think has been undervalued. The fact that you, working with what Rumsfeld called Old Europe and New Europe, right? You have brought Old Europe to a greater understanding that you're living with. So I see optimism that effective advocacy. I can't use a certain term because it's probably not PC. But there's no silver bullets, and it's like water torture, right? Drop by drop, you break the stone. And I think we're doing it, and I think we just have to keep doing it. And as I said, I think it's probably not real known how much your input has meant to this, if you say, opening of eyes, in Europe, and we still have some work to do here in the United States. Zigis, much has been said about the unity, and that has, if there's any silver lining to some of this, Europe has stepped up in so many different ways, but not all of Europe. We have, your different gatherings or compilations. Your predecessor, Andreas Apelios, he's convened the EU defense team with 7 EU states, but excluding Slovakia and Hungary. So I think, how do you interpret this? I mean, I think this is a way of, putting more, I guess, pressure, or I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, I will maybe really continue on this positive note that I'm always, I'm always optimist. I saw Soviet tanks, they killed my friends at TV Tower, and here I am 35 years ago. I'm strong as never before, and we are shining our freedom. But that's exactly, I think, what Americans are missing right now. In those now 21 years of our membership in EU and NATO, we changed the EU. We, Baltics, Poles, the center of gravity shifted so much to us. This is actually Nordic, Baltic, German team that is driving all the energy, and Ukrainians, of course, because Ukrainians are our hope today. We are, learning, like today in my parliament, we've been thinking how to build a drone wall that the Ukrainians have already, because, they have all the know-how. But if I would be American president, I would first of all then empower those nations who are like agents of change. We are maybe really one of the most transatlantic nations in Europe, because we will never ever forget what the Americans did, for example, for the Baltics, never recognizing our occupations and so on. So invest into those nations, appreciate that support. And instead, what do we have? We have cold decision of Pentagon to stop Baltic Security Initiative. And when I try to scream and shout, why? Oh, they say, Europeans are still buying oil and gas. We need to divert our resources to China. My God, don't you know that Baltics were the first to cut Russian import of oil and gas? We showed an example. Do you know that we've been sanctioned by China? Do you know that 3 Baltics detached from 17+1? Do you know that we are champions of defense spending? Actually, we all have 5% with Poles. Some Spanish will get there in decade. And, we are champions of support to Ukraine. So instead of punishing us and actually signaling to Russia, well, we are withdrawing from the Baltics, we might kill Baltic military assistance that, is being used actually to buy American weapons. We use your assistance to buy your production. We use your assistance to train our soldiers in your military schools. We use your assistance to equip our special forces. So it's stupid to deny that. So instead, Americans are cutting support to the best agents of change, and at the same time, they're screaming and shouting on Europe, please change. How will you actually change Europe by punishing the best agents of change you have in Europe?
Well, I think, Rihards, before we began the webinar, you spoke to this point about the amount of money, I guess, that was going for the Baltic security thing was 180 million, or
yeah, that was last year, 60 million for each Baltic member state. But there is also a conditionality for this assistance. It's not just US taxpayers' money being given, spend whenever you want. It's actually conditionality that we procure US produced weapon systems, gear, and etc. And it's not just, just, let's say in Latvia's case, 60 million. We add our national budget to it and so on. And that makes this positive balance for US. For example, you spend $1 with this Baltic Defense Initiative, you get $3 back. You have a workplace, you have a labor market, bigger and standards. It just on this unity. This, of course, we express that we are united, but unity lacks united in action. Yes, we are united, but when it comes to action, we start to stumble. Right now, there is a file in European Parliament to phase out purchases of Russian gas and oil. and petrochemicals as well. Not for the duration of how long might war take in Ukraine, but entirely, even after the war. That's it. We're done with the Russian gas and oil. Their member states and Baltic countries, we have done it already. We do not buy Russian gas nor oil, nothing at all. There are still those who are doing it. So we are there, we are getting there. But of course, 27 is a smaller, not smaller, it's big animal, but it's slower. But I wanted to come back to one point that Ian made, the nuclear coercion. There was just a few days ago, the National Security Council meeting in Russia, and Putin came out again with his monologue. And he sent again a message, sort of to say and make maybe the Trump's administration to say, he's actually a good lad. He's willing to cooperate. And it was the extension of the New START treaty. And as you know, it expires in February next year. Putin already announced that he's extending already for 1 year the New START treaty after the expiry date. That instantly you will see will be recognized as he's willing to cooperate. He's making concessions, which is false, because I want to bring a way bigger elephant into this discussion. Just patterns are something that you have to follow when it comes to Kremlin's modus operandi. Just look on how many occasions in past year and a half Putin met President Xi, and what followed week or 2 weeks afterwards. It was constantly the escalation of war effort in Ukraine and other very deeply active activities. And last but not least, Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting and parade in Beijing, that was a clear signal. We are united, and we are united in action against you. And this is something that needs to be registered deeply, deeply in European and transatlantic community. That's the axis of evil. Let's bring back this label. They're back in action, and they're really undermining. And this New START treaty, again, is my speculation, but we know that China has announced that they are modernizing their nuclear arsenal. They're increasing it. They're increasingly dramatically, 200, 300 warheads a year. That is, without Russia's help, sorry, they cannot achieve. So therefore, for Putin to extend for another year the New START treaty, which means not developing, not going into arms race with US says, okay, so they're keeping their stock as it is. Russia's keeping their stock as it is. But whose stock is really on the rise? China's. And this is where the transatlantic unity really aligns, even with Trump's administration. The threat that China is posing, not only physically security in the Pacific, but when it comes to rules-based order. And this is something that's really putting aside those small differences. We need to be united in action as well. I know Trump just made an announcement that he's prepared to impose harsh tariffs on Russia, but first Europe needs to do that. Well, I have the message. The Baltics have already done. Can you, at least in that proportion that applies to the Baltics, you can impose tariffs?
Ian, the latest challenge from President Trump. Well, first I want to say that, look, the issue, this has gone through multiple administrations, Republican and Democrats. And we could go back to the Chicken Kiev speech, right, by President Bush, as far as recent history and so on. But getting back to the whole issue of sanctions, President Trump says, okay, yes, to Europe, I'll impose sanctions if you stop buying gas. But is it really just a way to avoid taking the step to impose action? Because we're talking about countries like Hungary and Slovakia, right, which are a problem. And also, I think I read just a couple of days ago that the U.S. purchase of Russian fertilizer has jumped astronomically. It's as if we don't have enough fertilizer here in Washington.
And EU imposed huge tariffs on fertilizers from Russia.
Yeah.
So yeah, and the U.S. is purchasing more. So Ian, do you want to comment on this sort of I don't know if you want to call it. It's a very complex situation, I know, because Trump is trying to protect the farmers regarding the fertilizer, but still, it's, well, I don't know what to say.
Well, there is the hypocrisy as we continue to buy ourselves goods from Russia, and I think that's got to stop, and that's an opportunity for congressional action. Second, when it comes down to what Trump is asserting and promising, I think I do share what you infer as a concern that he's looking really for an excuse not to sanction Russia. And when I think about, quote unquote, the countries he's pointing out, it does capture my mind. He said NATO nations. You know, the two problem childs within Europe proper, so to speak, lack of a word, is Slovakia and Hungary. But I think there's more than enough pressure that the alliance and the European Union could push them at least to be neutral on that. And their purchase of gas is how to put it, it's not insignificant, but it's not overwhelming. I think the bigger concern that I would have watching what Trump is saying and what he can actually do is Turkey. And Turkey's probably the one that's going to be the most difficult to cut off from Russia oil and gas. I mean, it is a huge throughput area, spigot of Russian oil and gas into the world. Erdogan has a teetering economy. He's in political difficulty right now. He doesn't need to have the pain that comes with an energy cutoff. So when I think about the excuse that Trump is hiding behind, it's not so much the two Europeans we focus on. It's actually Turkey that could end up giving him the quote-unquote big excuse not to exercise those sanctions. The fact of the matter is, if the United States and the majority of European countries imposed secondary sanctions, took steps to cut Russia off from the financial system, secondary sanctions on India, secondary sanctions on China, it would shut down Russia's war machine. And you would see a significant degradation of its industries, ability to support this war, and you would start seeing some repercussions among the Russian public as they begin to feel a real squeeze. Because right now, the Russian public are actually on an economic high because we're not exerting our economic power the way we should be.
So if we cut off at 2:15, so we've got about 6 minutes. Yeah. So if we could have just around any last thoughts or comments that you all would like to make, and I'll go in the order that we started. Zigis?
Okay, I think the biggest mistake Rubio and Trump is doing right now, they are playing this neutral moderator, and they don't want to punish Putin because they think, oh, if they punish him, he will never negotiate. They treat Russians like normal Europeans. They are not normal Europeans. This is like, okay, gasoline station and chief of mafia. You have to push him hard, and then only with strength you can bring him to kind of negotiations or even surrender at the Eastern Front. So this is the huge mistake. Putin will never, ever enter negotiations or will never cease fire if Americans are not introducing those crashing sanctions. So this leads to nowhere and actually to the victory of Russians on their front with Ukraine.
Thank you. Michał, would you?
Yes, thank you.
Couple minutes, yes.
First of all, Putin don't believe that we are ready to fight against him. He don't believe that West is ready to go to war against Putin. So, and he's acting accordingly, knowing, in his opinion, that we are not ready to fight against him. He's pushing the limits. He's doing what he wants to do because he don't believe that we will counterattack. If he will start to believe, we will be safer. Because we are now trying to avoid the war, but we are actually making the war much more possible, trying to appease Putin than if we would try to act today. Slava Ukraine.
Heroyam Slava. I guess next we had Rihards, if you want to say a few closing words.
Yeah, the closing words would be, well, maybe it's a wishful thinking, but in the light of everything that recently has happened, if NATO could send a message to Putin saying that if you're going to go and directly attack, even though we know these malign activities, NATO, it's automatic membership for Ukraine in NATO. Simple as that. You attack any of the NATO member states, it's automatic. Ukraine is a member state, because it's also in the NATO's interest. If that happens, that's war, and we need the strongest European army in NATO, in the European continent, to fight Russia off. But I think that would be also a very clear kind of rethinking for Putin as well. Should I make that step, or are they bluffing?
Well, sounds to me like a great proposition to make to NATO. So, okay. Marko, would you like to say a couple of words, closing?
Again, many words has been said, but I think that the fight is on. This is our generational fight, and this is a fight for existence, not only for us, my country, Estonia, but also for entire West in one and another way, because we haven't touched China, we haven't touched some other power centers who are very, very much after us. So it's actually nobody else to blame but us, ourselves. And this is why we here in Estonia, we have decided, and I know that Latvians, Lithuanians, Poles do the same. We bolster our defense. We do everything from our part to keep alliance together and to lead by example. And what was positive, at least what I saw minutes ago, that right now Trump and Zelensky are meeting in New York. And Trump was asked about, should NATO shoot down Russian planes if they incur into NATO's airspace? And he said, yes, I agree with that. So I don't know, did he understand what that means? But at least this is something, some positive news, some positive.
Well, thank you for that. Well, that's why I say I remain optimistic that we'll get there drop by drop. Ian, what do you think about
Nadia,
this?
thank you, my colleagues. Let me just sit back and kind of make a broader strategic point. Europe is at a crossroads right now. It's at a fork in the road. And the road that it chooses is going to determine whether or not Ukraine survives and whether or not the transatlantic relationship survives. If it continues on its current track of waiting for the United States to lead, a continued track of kind of incremental actions against Russia and its aggression, Ukraine will lose, and the transatlantic community will collapse because it will be a blame game. Europeans will be bitter against the United States, and the United States will just blame the Europeans for not doing enough. That is a double win for Vladimir Putin. The other fork in the road that I hope the Europeans will take, and in fact, there's some signs they may be considering it, is actually exercising their leadership as a member of the transatlantic community. If they exercise the full weight of their economic magnitude, if they leverage the military forces that they have at hand, if they step up their role, their actions on an offensive capacity and a legitimate capacity in the hybrid realm, I think they can put Putin on the defensive in Ukraine. If they don't do that, it's hard for me to believe that Trump will do anything more. If they do that and have that in effect, Trump is the type of person that will want to be part of the winning team, and he will join. So that's what's at stake. It's Europe's hour. It's Europe's moment, and I hope they exercise the capability it has, because that will be good for Ukraine, that'll be good for Europe, and it'll be good for the transatlantic community.
Thank you, Ian. Well, Ian, I think you and our other friends of in our Friends of Ukraine network, we have our job cut out here. But I think in partnership with United for Ukraine, I think we're going to get there. So thank you all so much for this enlightening discussion, and hope we meet again to continue this dialogue. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.